Hey guys, in this video I'm gonna go over my Relic of the Pact build for 3.19 Kalandra League. So Relic of the Pact is a wand that gives you a skill called Blood Sacrament, and it hasn't been available in temporary leagues since Ultimatum. But they just brought it back with 3.19 along with making some changes to the skill, and since being updated I wasn't able to find much information about the skill's mechanics, and currently there's only one other player on PoE Ninja using it. So most of the information about the skill is basically from my own testing, so there could definitely be some things that I got wrong or misunderstood, but I'll try to explain it as best I can to show you guys how I decided to build this character around the skill. I also decided to try out the new reworked Heatshiver helm, which is the way I'm scaling damage with this build, essentially doubling my damage versus frozen enemies. And this build is able to freeze pretty much any boss in the game except maybe Ubers. Thanks to Expedition's End body armor and the scaling increased ailment effect. And I ended up going Inquisitor for free elemental penetration and huge ES regen, since I am using petrified blood and have quite a low HP pool. So mostly I just wanted to try out the skill since I didn't get a chance to play with it in Ultimatum, but it ended up being a pretty decent build. I think it's not super well rounded, but it does shine in some areas. It is a pretty complicated skill and I wouldn't recommend this guide for like newer players. But yeah, it's a decent build, and I have cleared all the endgame bosses deathless, but it's not quite strong enough to kill Uber bosses, since the build is contingent upon being able to freeze enemies to have full damage, and I don't think we're able to do that against Uber bosses. Also, the defenses are not really strong enough to tank anything in an Uber encounter, so that makes it a lot harder unless you play perfectly. And on top of that, you need to stand pretty close to the enemies to be able to deal damage, and that's a pretty big disadvantage against Uber bosses, especially when you have low defenses. Maybe with higher investment some Ubers will be possible, but with my current investment of about 15 to 20 divines, it's very hard. But it is pretty good for invitation farming, especially the hidden, because they can actually be completely frozen, unlike most other bosses, so you can permafreeze them and clear it with a very high quant, with Height of Hubris and Captivated Interest. And for general mapping, the build is a little clunky sometimes, but pretty effective, especially for things like Harvest, where you can just stand still, hold down right click to freeze and kill everything. But it can also it can be pretty prone to getting one shot, and it's pretty weak against chaos damage and like big physical hits. Okay, so I feel like there's a lot to go over, but yeah, this is the character, and I'm gonna start with just going over the skill a little bit, and then I'll go into the gear and the gems and talents and things like that. So okay, here's Relic of the Pact. It grants level 1 Blood Sacrament skill and gives lucky crit while on low life, and this is a low life build. So essentially how it works, it's a channeling skill that reserves life, and the goal is to get the reservation to just over 50%. So that way it only goes off once and doesn't reserve your whole life, because it just every stage reserves 50%, so it can't go to stage 2, so it just goes off instantly. If, for example, I take something out, you see it goes through many stages, but with only 26% reservation, and then I go down to lower. But the explosion gets bigger, but I decided to go more for like single target damage instead of bigger AoE, so that's why I'm only going for 50% reservation. Okay, so the way you scale reservation is through the gems in the wand, as well as like general modifiers to reservation. So we increase that through Essence Worm, which gives us 80% reduced reservation, thus increasing the cost of the skill, and through these 3 gems. So we have increased area of effect to give more damage and a little bit more AoE, because the AoE is quite small. You can use critical damage for a little bit harder hitting, but I prefer to have the awakened area of effect. It just makes the build feel a little bit better. And then we also have Divergent Arrogance, so this is only because it has 200% reservation. And then we have Second Wind, because that gives us +1 to cooldown use, which essentially doubles our cast rate. So kind of weird gems, Second Wind. But it's a little bit unintuitive, but it does make it so we can cast twice as fast. And again, Arrogance, you want Divergent, so it deals a little more damage from the quality, but otherwise it's just to get the reservation just right to 52%. If I could get it to 50.1, that would be ideal, but yeah. You can use other games like Life Tap, but then it will reserve more, and yeah. This is what I think is the best for this type of version. Because I only want to reserve 50% life, so I can have the other 50% life be used as like actual mitigation and have petrified blood. So yeah, that's the skill, and then the skill has a cooldown of, I think the base is 0.33 seconds, and you want to get the cast time to half the cooldown time, is the way I understand it. Because you have 2 uses, so you want it to be half as much as the cooldown time. So if I reduce my cast speed by removing this ring that has cast speed and my aura, I have a Watcher's Eye with cast speed. You can tell it's like this. Then with increased cast speed, it's like this. So the way I understand it is you'll want half the cooldown time. And yeah, I guess that's about it for the skill. Okay, so for the rest of the gear, we're using Heatshiver. Gain 100% of cold damage as extra fire damage against frozen enemies, and 1% damage as extra per 1% chill on the enemy. So we want to be able to freeze everything, then we're getting a bunch of extra fire damage, cold as extra fire damage. And the way we're freezing things is through, first we convert everything to cold with Hrim's Arrow. And then we're also using Expedition's End, which has freeze shield enemies as though dealing 87% more damage. So this is what allows us to freeze even like big bosses, even though they don't get like fully frozen in terms of they have a minimum movement speed, so they can still move around. But they're still considered technically frozen for things like Heatshiver. And we're also stacking some increased effect of ailments here, and on Ashfrost and Storm. Yeah, increased effect of non-damaging ailments also helps. And then, of course, we do have cooldown recovery here on the belt and the boots. 19% and 14%. That's how we get it to 0.26. I guess you could get it maybe a little bit lower, if because I guess you can get 20%, but if you can get it to 0.26, that's good. And then you also need a little bit of increased cast speed to get 0.13 cast time, and that is a little bit here, a little bit on the ring, and I think I have one jewel with 3% as well. There's other ways to get some more cast speed. I have 14% on my Watcher's Eye as well, while affected by Silotry. So that can be a little bit tricky to get the cast rate up there, but through jewels and things like that, it shouldn't be too hard. And then I have also Uprising. This is the most expensive item of the build. It gives us free hatred, so that it has no reservation. So we have essentially 3 big auras: Hatred, Grace, and Silotry. We're using Essence Worm, that's how we get the free Silotry. Everything you put in it is free reservation. So then we have this ring. You want a little bit of dexterity on the gear, a little bit of cast speed, life. You want to cap your resistances, of course, and you want to try to get as much chaos res as possible, because we are pretty weak against chaos damage, since we use quite a lot of ES for our mitigation. Even though we don't have a huge pool, we have a lot of ES regen from being an Inquisitor. Oh yeah, and we are using, of course, Sephal's Frame as our shield. It makes it so we can't block attacks, but it does give us a huge amount of spell block, 30%. We also have 15% on the tree, so 45%. And yeah, that gives us a little bit of mitigation against spells. It also gives 40 max res, which is really nice versus everything elemental. And it also gives just a lot of resists and a little bit of spell damage, so it's a really nice shield. I think that's it for the gear. For the flasks: Life Flask, Quartz Flask, Taste of Hate for more damage and a little bit of fizz mitigation. Bottled Faith is really nice, especially as Inquisitor. And for the last flask slot, I'm using a little bit different things. Sometimes Jade Flask for general mapping, Ruby Flask can be good versus some bosses. Sometimes you want a Quicksilver Flask. Yeah. I guess I'll go over all the other gems outside of the wand. So Frostblink or Flame Dash for movement skill, and then we also have Shield Charge. You have Shield Charge with faster attacks, life tap, and then we also have Mark on Hit with Assassin's Mark, with life tap for our curse. So it is pretty good to have a 5-link. You don't need a 6-link, of course, but having a 5-link for this setup is pretty good. Although we have one gem open, so there's not a huge pressure on sockets. The auras: Celerity, Hatred, Precision. Then we have here Vitality, Petrified Blood, Grace with Enlighten here. So to fit everything, you can, if you don't have, for example, Enlighten, you could throw out the Precision. It's just a level 1 for a little bit of extra crit. You can reduce the Vitality to level 1 and you don't need the Enlighten. And I think that's it for the auras. Then we have here we have Vortex with Bone Chill, Arcane Surge, and Unbound Ailments. This is to trigger Arcane Surge and Bone Chill on the enemy, which makes us deal more damage to them. And it also just gives a big chill effect for the Heatshiver, I guess. And then we have Immortal Call with cast and damage taken and increased duration, and also life tap. So because it actually costs a lot of mana if you don't have life tap. And yeah, I think that's it for the gems and the gear. Assassin's Mark curse effect is pretty good to have on the helm as well, since we're using Assassin's Mark. Yeah, I'm gonna go into the talent tree a little bit. So this is what it looks like. The only keystone we are using is Pain Attunement. Sometimes I spec into Leth Shade for certain bosses, like Maven, it's pretty good. Then I usually just take out some damage dealing thing, like this Mastery, and just put it into Left Shade. Sometimes you can take out a life node. But yeah, overall on the tree, you're taking these life and ES things. You're taking some crit, a lot of reservation nodes, all 3 of these, some spell block here. You need quite a bit of resist on this build, so we're using Alera for bandits. These give a little bit of resists. It can be nice since we're using a lot of uniques. I also have a lot of resists on my jewels. Overall, you want like cast speed, crit, spell damage, etc. for jewels and life. And for me, I needed a lot of resists since I didn't have a lot on the gear. Again, non-damaging ailments to make sure we freeze everything. A good amount of life. The more life, the bigger life pool we have, the more damage we deal, because it is based on how much life we reserve, not just percentage-wise, but also just numerically. And I guess I'm gonna put some like leveling trees in the POB. I don't really recommend leveling with Blood Sacrament. I recommend just using Armageddon Brand or Storm Brand. So that's the type of leveling tree I will put in the POB, but I'll do it in a way that so you don't have to like respec a bunch of points. It's gonna be pretty similar. You can use Relic of the Pact from like maybe level 38 when you get Essence Worm if you want to, but not really worth it in my opinion. I would rather just switch when you get into early maps, for example, but up to you at the end of the day. And yeah, I guess that's it for the main tree. Get some Grace Reservation here. For the Water Side, again, having these 2 mods was pretty cheap for me. It was only 1 Divine. If you can only get your... I think cast speed is most important here. But the cold damage is, of course, more damage, but you do want to get your cast rate correct. And yeah, that's about it for the regular tree. And of course, I am an Inquisitor, so I'm using Righteous Providence, Inevitable Judgment, Sanctuary, and Pious Path. Yeah, this gives us more damage and a bunch of ES regen. Life regen gained as ES regen, essentially, which is really good. And this is what allows us to have a full penetration. Well, if we had a 100% crit chance, I guess it would be full, but yeah, it gives us full penetration on crits. And we do have a pretty good crit chance, somewhere like 90% effectively. And for progression here, you want to just start by getting these nodes. So you have the region, and then you get this node last. But yeah, I'll show a tree progressing through the acts and things like that in the POB. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I know there's a lot of things going on with this skill, a lot of kind of weird mechanics, a pretty specific set of gear that you need. It is pretty cheap. Like, this is 6 divines, this is, I think, 1.5 divines, this is 3 divines. Somewhere between 15 and 20 divines for everything. Again, I don't really recommend this to newer players because there's a lot of things going on. You need pretty specific gear. You need the right amount of cooldown recovery rate, the right amount of cast speed and things like that. And you are playing with pretty low HP and things like that. Thinking what else. This belt gives this Harbinger that you need to summon, which gives us a speed boost. It gives us Tailwind almost. It gives increased action speed. But yeah, that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask, and I'll try to answer as much as possible. It's a pretty fun build. It's very different. Since this hasn't been available for such a long time, I thought it was a really fun idea to try to make something of it. I'm sure someone will make a better version of Relic of the Pact, but this is what I came up with, and it's really fun. I'm gonna put some boss kills at the end of the video, and yeah, thanks for watching.